For millions of Americans, the end of summer could also be the end of working from home. But after 2.5 years away from the office, what will it look like now? It's a common theme on TikTok.
Come back to the office, they said. Experience our culture, they said.
And for many, a source of anxiety.
So great to see everyone. It's so great. I'm so relaxed.
I recommend that everyone temper their expectations about going back to work, because one of the dangers is to think that you're going to go back to the way things were. You're not going back in time, right? You're going back to where we are now.
To reduce stress, experts say plan ahead. Talk to your boss about childcare and other accommodations you need, like flex hours. Map out your commute and parking. Choose your outfit and pack your work bag the night before. And bring food in case your favorite coffee or lunch spots have closed. Some companies like Airbnb have fully embraced remote work, while others have adopted a hybrid model. But there's a wide gap between what employees want and what some companies are pushing for. A recent study found more than 31% of workers who can do their jobs from home would prefer to avoid the office forever, while 27% of employers say that should rarely or never be the case. The key, experts say, is flexibility.
There really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to how and when to bring employees back.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to bringing employees back. We are in an on-demand digital environment where customization is expected by the younger generation of workers already. So we need to really think about designing work for where they are. And the only way we're going to do that is to listen to them and to understand them and not impose old models onto them.
So Vic, folks who are apprehensive perhaps about returning to the office, how should they decide which days to come? If they're being required to come in now, how do they make that decision?
Look, part of it is your mind frame. If you are nervous about it, it can be a nerve-wracking experience. If you just open your mind, embrace it, accept it's not going to be pre-2019. It will be different no matter what. Right. Then that's step one. And step two, if you work in a collaborative environment where you depend on mentorship or learning from other people or an apprenticeship model, then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that's the majority of folks are going to be there. You're going to see them. You're going to have that social interaction. So those are the most popular days. If you want to avoid the long commutes and you work better in a quiet office, Monday and Friday is kind of the secret sauce. Right. And that's okay if that's better for you. Here's the other thing. Nothing's permanent. We've learned that over the last 2.5 years. So if you come in and you're like, okay, Tuesday through Thursday is my jam, and you realize, no, actually it's not, ask your boss about switching to Mondays and Fridays.
Can you imagine if, like, 3 years we would have heard this conversation?
Oh,
like, 3 days, which ones am I going to come out? Like, you would have
Remember, we would do stories where, like, the 4-day work week. It's controversial.
Right.
No,
Now it's back.
but people are working.
Yeah,
you
they're
can be productive from home.
Absolutely.
So it's nice for that flexibility.
Yes.
Cool. All right, Vicki, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Sound familiar? Yes, this is the new landscape called the workplace that we are talking about. And we're so glad you chose to join us this morning. My name is Jim Stowe. I'm Director of the Office of Human Rights from Montgomery County. And we're here to discuss this issue of the hybrid workplace with a focus on intergenerational workforce and how we, in fact, are looking at the whole 50-plus worker in the workplace and how do we all kind of make that work in this day and time where there's so many demands on the workplace, so many demands on actually employees as well, and the marketplace. Of course, this drives, of course, everything that we do from a competition standpoint. So there's so many things to look at and so many aspects of this. So we thought this might be a good opportunity. After 1 year ago, looking at the issue of the hybrid workplace being flexible and responsive to individuals and circumstances that in fact surround the workplace, to looking at it now 1 year later, how has it worked? Is it working? What do we need to do differently? Is it time for a reset in how we look at the workplace? Well, folks, we'll look at all those things today with some very, very special guests that are here lined up for you today. So thank you again for being part of this ongoing discussion about this issue of the intergenerational workplace, the plus 50 worker, and how we're looking at him or her here in our community and all across the country, because all of us are dealing with the same kinds of concerns and the same kinds of challenges. I'm very pleased again to have a person who has been working with us on this journey. Sean Perry is going to be our moderator again this time around for this particular segment and this particular section of our programming. And we're so glad to have him here. I'm going to introduce him very briefly because he's been here before. He's the founder and executive producer of a show called The Senior Zone. It's DC's #1 radio program for seniors. This program is aired weekly and is dedicated to serving the needs of the older adult community, and now in its 10th year. He's very celebrated in this work that he does, and so I'm so pleased that he's agreed to be with us again this time around for this second segment of our programming, looking at this very important issue. Sean Perry, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Jim Stowe. It is my absolute honor to be here today with you, as well as alongside the wonderful panelists that we have lined up. To our viewers, good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, guten morgen, Zawin, in any and all languages, good morning and welcome to Montgomery County, Maryland's Employer Summit Information Workshop Revisited, hosted by their Office of Human Rights. As Jim mentioned, my name is Sean Perry. I'm the executive director and host of the Senior Zone. It's a weekly radio program that launched on Veterans Day Monday of 2012, where we have served and continue to serve as a forum of connection and inspiring possibilities for our older adults that are seeking useful and relevant information, encouragement, and guidance. We unite seniors, as Jim mentioned, 50 and up, with tips and directions to senior programs and services, tools and resources, events, advice, and cultural tidbits from time to time. We air every Monday morning at 10 a.m. on Eastern Standard Time on WYCB 1340 a.m. here in the Washington, D.C. market. So thank you for indulging me on that unashamed plug. I am, however, Jim, I'm humbled. I'm excited to be the moderator for today. Our theme this year is capitalizing on the new hybrid workplace revisited because it was in June of last year where we gathered panelists of industry experts to discuss an envisioned workplace environment, as I would call it, that was intergenerational, flexible, and responsive. Today's session, however, will look at the success and challenges of the hybrid workforce with a focus on the intergenerational workforce, legal implications, and what form and format the workplace takes place currently as well as in the future. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity, Jim, to thank our sponsors for this event. So we thank AARP of the state of Maryland, WorkSource Montgomery, as well as Montgomery County, Maryland's Office of Human Rights for their support and leadership, as well as the trust in extending this awesome privilege to this humble guy here to guide today's discussion. I am truly, truly honored. I don't know about you, but it feels good to be back. Let's begin with today's program. We have a great collection of panelists lined up for our viewers, just for you out there. We have Ms. Lena Barkley, Operations Manager of Workforce Initiatives over at CVS Health. We have Teresa Murray, Assistant Legal Counsel of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Office of Legal Counsel. And we have Dr. Michael, also known as Dr. Woody Woodward. He's an organizational psychologist and clinical assistant professor of executive coaching and organizational consulting at New York University. It is now my pleasure, Jim, with your permission, my friend, to bring to the screen Lena Barkley.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Lena. Allow me to properly introduce you to our audience. Lena Barkley serves as the Workforce Initiatives Operation Manager with CVS Health for the area markets that include over 1,800 stores in 7 states, including Michigan, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Indiana. She has served with CVS Health for a very long time now, coming up on 28 years. Lena, the floor is yours, my friend.
I'm so happy to be here and represent CVS, especially with this talk of returning to work. So it's also an opportunity for us to launch the last day of Employ an Older Worker to Work Week. So I just want to pull up my video. Can you see it? So we can go back. Can you see my screen now? Yes. Can you see my screen now? Yes. So as I was discussing, it's National Employee and Older Worker Week, and I sit on the Talent is Ageless Advisory Council. So with that, we have a real synergy for putting workers to work, making sure that they have the skill set. What does it mean to have a person in your store? And you just looked at some of the myths about older workers coming to work in this landscape. So we want to drill down to a little bit of the comparison with our workers and our organization. And a lot of people don't know that we're just not the retail anymore. And so the national average is about 24% of workers over 55. And we are just not retail anymore, as I stated, but we're omnicare. We're the DCs, which represent logistics. We are Aetna. We are Caremark, as well as the stores that you walk into every single day. So this is the landscape of where we are and what we're doing to promote older workers into our stores. So we're an essential worker, and every day our organization brings their heart to every moment of your health. And so with that, you could walk in the store and you're making sure that you're being seen by a technician or someone is ringing up your merchandise. You're going into Omnicare, where we absolutely support that sweet spot of making sure that our nursing homes are taken care of with prescription-based quorum specialty, that infusion nurse that is going into homes and hospitals to prepare that concoction of medication. And everything that comes to the stores is done through our warehouses. So every delivery service is done that way. Aetna, since 2018, was merged together with CVS. And
hello,
together,
Lena. If if I can jump in here, Lena, can you show your slides? We're unable to see your slides. I know you have a great, wonderful presentation to show us, and we don't see those slides.
Okay. Let's see if we can go back again.
I apologize for interrupting.
Okay. Let's see if I can do it now. So you have to share screen. I'm clicking share.
Here we go.
Now, all right.
You're looking good.
All right, so let's go back over and slideshow. And I apologize for that. And so we employ older week. We talked about how important that is for us and our landscape of what we're doing. This is actually part of the initiative that I work with Talent is Ageless. So we have an actual core group that is working to facilitate how our seniors are going to integrate, how they're going to work, how they're going to get the skill set to be successful in the workplace. And so with that, we actually have an opportunity to, let's see if it's going to go next. I won't move. There we go. We have a comparison slide that represents what the national average is for workers working in the United States and what we are through our many centers of how we operate with CVS. So a lot of people don't know we're just not retail anymore. We absolutely represent in the enterprise of operations that represent 300,000 employees. And so Omnicare and Quorum, we have 27% of those, very high number that are working and are 55 and older. So with that represents our nursing home population, prescriptions going at, our call centers, Quorum specialty, nurses, pharmacists. They have infusion. They actually go into those nursing homes and hospitals and actually prepare that concoction of medication that people need. And so our distribution is so critical. And a lot of people think that older workers aren't in our distribution center, but everything is done by a held hand computer system. No, gone are the days where you're heavy lifting and all of that. So a lot of seniors gravitate to that. And it's like a fine-tuned family where all the merchandise that comes to every unit of our business is done through our distribution center. And in 2018, Aetna Insurance Company and CVS merged. And with that, we became one of the largest health providers in the nation. We are fourth on the Fortune 500. And with that, 19% of those workers are seniors over 55. And so again, as I said, you could be doing telehealth. You could be, working in a call center environment. You could managing that Medicare and Medicaid processes that we do through that insurance line. Caremark is our PBM, pharmacy benefit management. A lot of our seniors, a lot of people get their prescription-based delivery service through their homes, through their businesses. And so Caremark is our largest environment of that. And 17% of our older workers work there. And retail, of course, we are a business that never, ever shut down. We're essential workers. And so you have that lens where it could be a nice mature worker ringing you up, or it could be a senior pharmacist or a technician working to help you in that retail setting. So that's what we do. And we looked at the video and we talked about the myths. I take away from that, we are here. We're an untapped talent pipeline with our mature workers because we come to work on time. It's communication, it's dedication, it's making sure that we align ourselves with being that mentorship for some of the younger members that are coming on to our environment and our teams and our workforce. So you've seen that. And so we're dispelling the myths that you should not use this population to actually bring them to work. And they're able to adjust. We're able to articulate going back to work or having the ability to be flexible. We are that population that can do that. And then I just want to highlight, and this is from the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. This is Mimi, and her real name is Rosemary. And with that, she had her background was actually Lord and Taylor. She worked back in the day, Marshall Fields. And so she had been laid off in 2019 going into the pandemic. They had downsizing, and she had a chance to actually just really say, you know, this is it, and I'm going to retire. And she spent her days devoting to her community work and her family. And she told me, yeah, that was good for a while, but, husband being home, he was retired. It's got a little stale. So she desired to go right back into the workforce. And this was a perfect fit for her. And a lot of our 24-hour stores in some of our areas, being DC, Chicago, California, we have beauty. And it's 7 aisles of actual beauty products that originate with us having this landscape to help people really stay in that environment of looking good and feeling good. And with that, it became a perfect fit for Mimi to come back. And really, she started her journey October in 2020, and now she's working with us, and her store manager on DuPont Circle in DC says she's the jewel of the beauty department. So hooray for Mimi, and she's doing such a fantastic job. And there, again, you have the lens that we can adapt. As I stated, in this environment, we had to be the place that was available for our customers to come in and feel comfortable. This was where she landed, and she says, I'm never going to retire. So only God knows when she'll step down. So this is just one of the many stories that we have with how we can adapt and really make it a plus employment to working with seniors, having the ability to do the best job and integrating our multicultural, diverse workforce that we have. And so this is CVS. And the last thing I want to say, with this lens, it's so important that we have colleague resource groups. And if anything happened through the pandemic, is we had to take a look and have a back step of how we were going to return to work, what happened to our corporate offices, and how we could change the mindset of not only how we felt about it, but how we can originate to do better. And so there was focus groups, and every one of the colleague resource groups participated in that. I'm proud to say that I'm national co-chair of the Faith CRG. And with that, we had a chance even every single day to integrate what that would look like, to have offices that have the ability to shut down for an hour every Monday and really have the chance to really have their faith in the workplace and have a pleasant place to do that. And with that, we've added a new colleague resource called mindfulness. And with that, again, through the pandemic, what's going to happen? What do I do when I go back to work? How do I adjust? It's the mind that had the most effect on that. The stress level, how do I manage that stress? And so with that, through our colleague resource groups, we had a availability to pivot and take a look and adjust. Yes, we're an essential worker, but we have corporate offices that house those individuals, and they've been able to choose whether they want to come to work 2 or 3 days a week. They can choose whether they want to stay home. Myself, as a personal testimonial to that, I'm working from home. And so unfortunately or fortunately, some of our offices were shut down, and they were actually allocated for us to have this ease, familiarity of working from home. And so we have the ability to have conversations every single day with our team. We have team leads. Everything that you do is essential to bringing your heart to work every single day. And with that, inundating our customers to feel comfortable that when they are involved with CVS, the workforce, the senior workforce, the multicultural workforce is where it needs to be. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lena, for those remarks. You know, the story of Mimi, I'm sure, resonates in millions of homes around the country, and for that matter, certainly and likely around the world. So I'm like Mimi, Lena. I'm not going to retire.
Yes,
that's my plan. I'll be doing something else with this life that I have. Certainly, you know, in lieu of a comment, Lena, I'll present it in a form of a question for you, if you don't mind. Okay. So as an employer for many years of an intergenerational workforce, what specific steps has CVS taken to ensure that its older workers and its diverse workers are accepted in the workplace? You know, how do you handle situations, or how does CVS handle situations where the transition, right, into the workplace runs into some form of difficulty?
And so you have a voice, and that's what this is all about. Through our HR teams and through, again, I want to just shout out to our colleague resource groups. And with that, they're really the voice of the company. And so they, through that lens, changed a lot of the landscape of what we do and how we do business today. And social justice and equity was the forefront of our minds. And with that, you have the ability to speak out and voice your opinion to what you wanted to do. And one of those things was absolutely, how do I come back to work? How do I, decide what I'm going to do? For some of those, it was no choice. Of course, if you're a nurse and you have to go into a nursing home, you have to do that work. If you're a pharmacist and you're working in one of our stores, that's what you do. And you are dedicated to doing that job every single day. So we pivoted, and remember, we did it on a dime. You walked into our stores and the screens are up and the spots are on the floor to where you stand, and the masks were there, but you could hear our employees smiling, see them smiling through their masks. And so we pivoted. For a lot of us who had to be that HR team or workforce that were in offices, they, as I stated again, we took your information, we took your ability to tell us what you wanted and pivoted on that. So if you're walking into headquarters in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, then the desks are going to be different. The spacing is going to be different. The cafeteria is going to look different. You have the ability to say, I'm here for 3 days, and I'm going to have the ability through a dual screen or a computer to actually have that ability to connect with your team and do the best job possible. Well, we are fitted in every way possible to do that job.
Yeah. Have you found the issue around socialization, or the re-socialization, if that is in fact a word, have you found that to be an issue, folks returning? So for your non-essential employees that were home, working from home, and now having to be reintroduced back into a workplace environment, have you seen any issues? And if so, what are the more common issues that you've seen and found?
And I think we talked about that. It looked the same for any business with the video that we just saw, how I'm going to take care of the kids, or what's going to happen. Can I actually adjust? What days of the week do I want to come? And that was all put into research and focus groups, and we're able to pivot and and look at where you can do your job and do it best. So you do have the ability to work from home and come to work in some incidents. So that was all done to asking a question. We also have an engagement survey, and that actually talks about what the needs were in that engagement survey. So yes, I think you have the voice now, and it talked to us. And through our research, we have really pivoted and did a good job to recognizing what will work and what will not work. And so it's all for the benefit of bringing that health, not only to our consumers, but our employees as well. Because if you don't feel good about coming to work, then you're not going to pass it on to the consumer as well. So we had to make that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Lena. I want you to stand by. We're going to have some Q&A on the back end of this presentation here. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Lena Barkley, Workforce Initiatives Operation Manager with CVS Health. It is now my pleasure once again. I'm having a bunch of pleasures here, Jim, but it's my pleasure now to bring to the screen Teresa Murray. Teresa, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning. Good morning. Allow me to introduce you properly as well, Teresa. Teresa Murray is Assistant Legal Counsel of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Office of Legal Counsel and serves as Director of the Office of Legal Counsel's Coordination ADEA Division, which has primary responsibility to implement Executive Order 12067, which made the EEOC the chief federal agency on equal employment opportunity and set in place requirements and procedures for other agencies to coordinate workplace rules with the EEOC. Coordination ADEA Division attorneys oversee the handling of EEO related matters that are raised directly with the Commission by other federal agencies, governments, and international organizations, or are identified by division attorneys. This division is also responsible for all regulatory and policy work involving the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. Attorneys in this division serve as subject matter experts for Commission staff and external stakeholders of all age discrimination matters, as well as administrative law, executive orders that implicate the EEOC, and requirements of the Office of Management and Budget. Before joining the EEOC, Ms. Murray served as a senior civil rights analyst for the United States Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights and special assistant to the director of the Civil Rights Division of the Food and Nutrition Service. Prior to entering government service, Ms. Murray worked as a litigator in private practice for over 10 years, where she owned and operated a boutique law firm specializing in employment discrimination law. Ms. Murray earned her Juris Doctorate from George Washington University Law School and graduated with honors from Howard University with a BA in political science. She is a mother of a daughter as well as a son. Teresa, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. I'm sorry that had that much detail in it. I'm just an attorney and an employee, just like everyone else, and it's a pleasure to be here today. If we could bring up my presentation. So I do apologize in advance. This will be kind of heavy on the legal side, but it's important to focus on the legal landscape of this because this is sort of the backdrop of what's going on as we re-enter the workforce. So my discussion will focus on the legal survey of significant cases under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. Next. Next slide, please. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, enforces federal laws that make it illegal to discriminate against a job applicant or an employee because of the person's race, color, religion, sex, which includes pregnancy, sexual orientation and gender identity, national origin, age, 40 and older, which we'll discuss, disability, or genetic information. Our website is eeoc.gov, which contains many resources and much of the information that will be discussed today. Next slide. The laws that we enforce specifically are Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You may have heard reference to Title VII, which also prohibits race, color, national origin discrimination, religion discrimination, as well as sex. Pregnancy discrimination and Equal Pay Act also are closely related to Title VII. The ADEA, which we will be discussing today, Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I will refer to as the ADA, and sections of the Rehabilitation Act. Those prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability, and the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which, as it indicates, prohibits discrimination on the basis of genetic information. Next slide, please. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA, is found at 29 U.S.C. 623. And it specifically makes it unlawful for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or otherwise discharge an individual or discriminate against that individual in any aspect of their employment, including their compensation, terms and conditions or privileges of employment because of that person's age. It also prohibits an employer from limiting, segregating, or classifying employees in any way that deprives or tends to deprive the individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affects their status as an employee because of such individual's age. And that phrase is really important, and I'll explain why when we get further into this. The Act also prohibits retaliation, which means that if an employee opposes or participates in certain what's called protected activity, an employer cannot discriminate against that individual. So if an employee or applicant opposes a practice that's unlawful or that is unlawful under the ADEA, or if they participate or exercise rights that are available to them under the law, such as filing a charge of discrimination with our agency, testifying or assisting in someone else's case, or being involved in investigations, proceedings, or litigations under the Act, those activities cannot serve as a basis of an employer taking action or adverse employment action against that employee. Next slide. So who is covered by the ADEA? It's not all employers. Some employers are not covered. Only those employers with 20 or more employees are covered by this Act. And likewise, not all employees are covered by the Act. Applicants' employees must be 40 years old or older. So that means if someone is under the age of 40, the ADEA does not prevent discrimination or other activities pertaining to that individual. There may be state or local laws that may protect them, but the federal law only protects individuals that are over the age of 40. Next slide. So there are various types of age discrimination. Just generally, if an employee suffers an adverse action or something that impacts any aspect of their employment, hiring, firing, pay, job assignments, benefits, any term or condition of employment, that could give rise to a discrimination claim. And there's really two essential ways that employees can bring claims. It's through the legal theory of disparate treatment, or through the theory of disparate impact. Disparate treatment means it's an individual has suffered some form of intentional discrimination, meaning they were treated differently or disparately because of his or her age, typically not as favorable as other employees. The other method of proving discrimination is disparate impact, meaning that there's some neutral policy or practice that applies to everyone, regardless of their age, but has a negative impact on applicants' employees who are over the age of 40, and it's otherwise not based on a reasonable factor other than age. Next slide. The Act of the ADEA also prohibits harassment. We may be familiar with that. Harassment takes place when there's offensive conduct or derogatory remarks that are related to a person's age, that are so frequent or severe that it creates a hostile or offensive work environment and or it can result in an adverse employment action like a firing or a demotion of some sort. Next slide. So let's dive into some of these cases. There are certain seminal cases that sort of lead the landscape or dictate how other cases are decided by courts. And the central case is the Gross versus FBL Financial Services, which the Supreme Court rendered back in 2009. In that case, the plaintiff had brought an ADEA disparate treatment claim. So that the plaintiff was alleging that he was individually discriminated against. And the court found that first, that the employee must prove by preponderance of evidence that age was the but-for cause for the employer's action. So what does all that mean? The preponderance of evidence standard essentially means that it was more likely than not that it happened for that reason. To put it in lay terms, it means it was more likely true that it was but for the person's age, the employer would not have made that same decision. And the but for cause is what is critical in that court's decision, because the statute specifically says because of such individual's age. And that makes it distinctive from other anti-discrimination laws because, for instance, under Title VII, you can have a mixed motive, you can have multiple motives. And if one of them is for a prohibited basis, such as your race, that could establish a violation under the Act. Age is different. It has to be a but-for cause, which means it must be the reason that the action was taken. And in Gross, the court said that they're not going to analyze the case in ways that courts typically analyze other anti-discrimination law cases, where there's a shifting burden back and forth, where an employee puts forth what we call a prima facie case, where we simply say there are certain characteristics, there are certain facts, and then the burden would sort of shift to the employer to say that it was for a legitimate non-discriminatory reason that they took this action, and the burden would shift back to the employee to bring forth evidence that would show that it was really for a discriminatory reason. The court in Gross said the court should not do that. We're just going to look at whether the plaintiff brings forth sufficient evidence to show that but for his or her age, the adverse action would not have taken place. So that was a major shift. It may not sound like much, but for courts, that's a big shift in terms of how to analyze these cases. The next case is the Senna versus Bradley University, which was decided by the Seventh Circuit in 2021, which made clear that same but-for standard applies for retaliation. So as I mentioned, that age is the factor, but also ADEA prohibits retaliation. So if an employer is taking an action against an employee because they engaged in the protected activity of opposing the violation or engaging in some part of a proceeding or investigation, if that is the basis of the claim, the employee has the burden of showing that but for him or her engaging in that activity, they wouldn't have made that employment decision. So that was an important development. And lastly, Pelcha versus MW Bank Corp, which was a Sixth Circuit decision decided last year, where the court discussed direct evidence in the instance where there are statements made by either supervisors or managers that may tend to show a bias based on age, and a determination of whether those are sort of stray remarks that are sort of tangential or unrelated to the employment decision, or whether they are direct evidence of discrimination. And we'll talk a little bit more about those, because those cases tend to be very interesting and certainly are important when we look at the landscape of these cases. Next slide. A recent case was also just this year issued by the 10th Circuit in Stroop versus United Airlines. And in that case, the 10th Circuit found that there was sufficient pretext evidence to uphold a jury finding. So what is pretext evidence? That's when the evidence demonstrates that the employer gave a false reason for his or her action, so that they provided a pretext to cover the real reason for the action. So that is a persuasive set of evidence, because it's to presume that an employer wouldn't offer a false reason unless he or she was trying to cover up an illegal reason. So the pretext evidence in that case was fairly strong. And the plaintiffs were a 61 and a 55-year-old flight attendants who were terminated because of their age. The plaintiffs had undermined the credibility of the airline's explanations for their terminations by showing that they engaged in a willful violation, which is means that that the employer was found to have acted in bad faith and intentionally to violate the law. And essentially, it was in three areas. First, the plaintiffs showed that they were being terminated for policy violations that were pretty commonplace. We may be familiar with that, where if everyone comes in late, that's become sort of the practice and the norm. But if an employer decides, oh, we're going to fire the older workers when they come in late, that's indicia of age discrimination. Also, the employer failed to follow their own written policies and procedures, specifically as it related to progressive discipline. And we may be familiar with progressive discipline, where that's where the employers have indicated that as workplace violations may occur, the consequences will become more and more severe. So it may start with a warning, go to a letter of warning, some form of suspension, and then a termination. So in this case, the employers did not follow that. They went directly to the termination. They didn't go through any progressive steps. And that failure to follow that practice and policy was indicative of a willful violation of the ADEA. And lastly, the employer just ultimately provided conflicting reasons for the termination. If an employer gives 2 or 3 different explanations, you tend to not believe their explanation. And the jury in this case did not. And the court found that it was a fact-intensive and individualistic determination made by the jury, and that there was solid evidence of pretext, which was that it was a false reason given, and that the employer was aware of their obligations not to discriminate, but they willfully violated that and ultimately fired the 2 flight attendants. So it's a very important case. It's a jury case, and so it just makes clear that employers can obviously use this as instructive. Follow your policies. If you have progressive discipline, employ those steps. Make sure that your reason is factual, that you're given for your action, and that it's consistent across the board. Next slide. Another case involved a reduction in force, which we may be familiar with when there is a layoff. And that's a different way of showing a violation under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And that involves Thompson v. Fresh Products. There was a decision by the Sixth Circuit where the court had not allowed the case to go forward, but found in favor of the employer at the summary judgment stage, and said that the employer did not violate the ADEA when they laid employees off. The court there made clear that in order to create what's called an inference of discrimination, or just an indication that there was discrimination, and you do so through the use of statistics, that they must show a significant disparity and eliminate the most common non-discriminatory explanations for the disparity. So in that particular case, the plaintiff showed that there were 5 employees who were laid off, and that the average age of those employees that were considered for termination, the average age is 45.76. Now that's a weird number. So that means a little, 45, but you're close to turning 46. So, when you're doing averages, you don't get a neat number. So that's what that means. And then also the comparative group, which were retained, those are the employees that were not laid off. Their average age was 35.66, which means, the average age was an employee that was about to turn 36 years old. So when the court looked at those 2 groups, the court said, well, between 46 years old and 36 years old, we don't find that's a significant enough disparity there. And the plaintiffs did not go on to rebut or refute any of the reasons provided by the employer. So it's one of those cases that if they're not using any remarks by employers, they're not using comparative data other than looking at the statistics and looking at the two groups, the court makes clear there has to be a significant disparity for there to be a violation found. Next slide. Okay, so let's look at some of these interesting cases that involve things that employers or managers or supervisors said. Those tend to be the interesting fact patterns. Those when an employer or someone working on behalf of the employer, a supervisor or manager makes a remark, it can fall into one or two categories essentially. Is it a stray remark, something that they just said as an off-the-cuff comment that had nothing to do with the employment decision, or is the remark, proof, direct evidence that the person has a bias and that was the reason for the employment action? So let's look at a couple of cases. In Lively versus Rafra, basically advisory group, the Second Circuit indicated that the following fact pattern was simply a stray remark. The plaintiff alleged that the employer waged a campaign to terminate older workers, but lacked factual plausibility, essentially, that was really going on. Two allegedly ageist statements were made by the plaintiff's supervisors. One, that the plaintiff was, quote, too old, and that they needed to replace him with a younger worker. So were those statements just sort of offhand comments, or were they directly related to the decision that they ultimately made? The court found that it was a stray remark. The court found there that first, that the comments weren't repeated. Two, that they were not directly linked to an ageist stereotype of some sort. And three, that the remark did not play a substantial role in the employment decision, and specifically that the person who uttered the remark did not play a substantial role in the decision. And the court also made a note that the remarks did not happen close in time to when the decision was made, and that the manager, ultimately, there are just some interesting facts. The manager at issue who made the remark actually promoted the plaintiff previously, and that particular plaintiff had some performance and other issues, in that there were some allegations of harassment and sex discrimination by that plaintiff. So it wasn't the best case, essentially, for the plaintiff, but what's instructive from there is that the factors that the court looked at to determine whether those remarks, which may sound like direct evidence, but the court looks at how close in time to the decision they were made, whether they were made by a decision maker, whether they were repeated, and whether they evince an ageist bias by that person. Conversely, there is another case issued by the First Circuit last year. I apologize for not pronouncing this correctly. Zamparello Reinfeldt versus Ingersoll Rand, de Puerto Rico. And the facts in that case involved a 55-year-old district general manager who had no performance issues, first of all. He claimed that he was wrongfully discharged as part of a reduction in force because of his age, and that his duties were assigned to two younger employees. At the time of the termination, the supervisor had told the employee that he was being terminated because, one, the company wanted to rejuvenate the region, that they wanted a rejuvenation of the team, that they wanted to rejuvenate the management, and wanted to rejuvenate the entire management team. So what term is repeatedly stated in these remarks? Rejuvenate. And there, the individual who made the statement was a key managerial employee who actually made the decision to terminate the plaintiff. And the court found that those statements were, particularly the use of the term rejuvenation and rejuvenate over and over, was an admission but by the decision-making employer that it decided to terminate the plaintiff because of his age and because they wanted a younger workforce. The court specifically said that the term rejuvenate is associated with age and is generally defined as an act of making someone or something young again. So the court there found that it was not merely a stray remark, that it was actually direct evidence, and found in favor of the plaintiff and said a reasonable jury could find that that was age discrimination in that case and denied the employer summary judgment. Next slide, please. Okay, another two cases dealing with the stray remark versus direct evidence. Pelcher, which I referenced earlier in my presentation, involved a Sixth Circuit case from last year as well. And in that case, it was a 47-year-old managerial employee who alleged that 3 age-based statements were made by the bank's president and CEO. And the plaintiff claimed that that was direct evidence. The president in this case, and the CEO, was the decision maker who did decide to terminate the employee. So what were the remarks? The remarks were comments related to another employee, not the plaintiff, that the employee who was in her 80s had a limited shelf life and that she had reached her, quote, expiration date. The statement was also made that they were going to reduce her hours to make her quit. And finally, that the statement was that they wanted to hire younger tellers to work for the bank. They thought that would be a better move for the company. So those were the statements. The court there found, though, that those statements were not sufficient to demonstrate direct evidence. First, they said that they were not sufficiently related to the decision-making process, even though that was the decision maker, that the statements were relating to another employee. It wasn't in the context of the decision. So the court didn't find that as direct evidence. They also indicated that they weren't made in proximate, close in time to when the termination decision was made. Ultimately, the court concluded that none of the president's alleged statements related to the decision to terminate the plaintiff. They were 6 months prior to the decision, and that they rejected any arguments that these remarks evinced or direct evidence of age discrimination. The court actually called those statements vague, and they were not necessarily indicative of an age bias, because saying they wanted to hire younger workers did not necessarily require a termination of the older workers. That's what the court ultimately decided. And that the comments were just too isolated and sparse and just weren't sufficient to rise to the level of direct evidence. So you could see, depending on the court, you get a different result. And lastly, in Bounds versus Town of Red Springs, there was a district court decision earlier this year in January, where an employer was denied a motion to dismiss a 66-year-old water treatment plant operator. Alleged that once he returned from medical leave for a bladder cancer, and he had to have a colostomy bag, that the employer treated him differently. The supervisor had told him that he was now a liability, that they altered his job responsibilities, and that they put him in a less physically demanding job, but at the same time, when he was required to provide some of his original duties, he was disciplined for doing that. He claimed that the town manager, because this is a public employer in this case, was that the town manager had made a statement that the employee was going to get hurt on the job and then cost the defendants a lot of money. And he reminded the plaintiff that he was eligible for retirement and that he should go ahead and retire. The plaintiff in this case had decided not to retire until he was 70. So they had issued him disciplinary actions and engaged in a number of these kinds of activities with him. The plaintiff in that case alleged that he was constructively discharged. He couldn't work there anymore, and alleged that it was essentially as a result of him getting older and that he was over the age of 40 and therefore had protection under the ADEA. The court explained that that the repeated reference to him likely injuring himself was based on age. And the court specifically said, quote, "It is the kind of stereotypical assumption that the ADEA sought to eliminate and eradicate by Congress passing the law." So he felt that those comments were not isolated, and that the discussions with respect to the termination of the plaintiff's employment suggested, even in those discussions, that he should retire, that all of that was related to age and therefore was indicative of a violation of the ADEA. So as you can see, depending on what the remarks are, how close they are in proximity, how frequently they are uttered, whether they're uttered by decision makers, whether they're uttered during the context of the employment decision. Those are all factors that the courts tend to look at to determine whether they are direct evidence of age discrimination or if they're just stray remarks that don't have any bearing on the decision itself. Next slide. So I'll touch on a few best practices that we could pass on to employers to avoid violating the ADEA. First is to not exclude older workers. We know in the context of this pandemic, we're coming out of the pandemic, but the CDC had indicated that obviously that older adults were more at risk for contracting COVID-19, and may result in some more severe illness. That fact, though, can't lead to the exclusion of older workers from the workplace. Even if employers are trying to be benevolent and protect the employee, you can't involuntarily exclude them from coming into the office or otherwise working for the employer. So just because they've been designated as part of a vulnerable population by the government, that can't serve as a basis to treat them differently than other employees. Also, we would certainly suggest that the employers offer flexibilities to older workers and all workers to the extent that they can. Nothing in the ADEA prevents an employer from treating older workers more favorably. So if you want to offer them more flexibilities, you're free to do that. And oftentimes, those flexibilities may be required if older workers have a disability or for a religious reason, they need what's called a reasonable accommodations. Employers are required to provide those reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act and also Title VII. So to bear in mind that it may not be just a choice of offering those flexibilities if employees need them under the ADA or under Title VII. They are entitled to them by law. Lastly, to always consider that EEO laws must be followed no matter how employees are working. So if they're working in the workplace physically at the physical location, or if they're working virtually, EEO laws must still be respected. And this is particularly important so that employers can make sure and root out any form of harassment. Now, we acknowledge that may be a little bit more difficult to do if things are being done electronically. They're not physically in the workplace, right? They may be sending messages virtually and the employer is not aware. Employers can make sure to remind their employees that work virtually that they still must follow EEO policies and laws, and that they are encouraged to report any activities which are considered harassing or offensive, so that employers will have the opportunity to bring an end to that kind of harassment before it becomes a hostile work environment. So just because we're in a virtual environment, it doesn't mean discrimination and harassment can't occur. Sometimes we have to be all the more vigilant in that kind of arrangement. And so we encourage employers to do that. Last slide, please. There is a really good resource that I would like to plug on our website called What You Should Know About COVID-19 and the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act and other EEO laws. We just recently updated it again in July, and it provides a number of fact scenarios, lays out what your responsibilities are, and provide some clear guidance on how employers can navigate this tricky environment, but make sure that they're still complying with EEO requirements. I've provided my email here, and individuals with questions feel free to send me an email if you have follow-up questions. But of course, we're going into Q&A. Thank you very much, Sean.
All right. Well, Teresa, I don't know what to say. I'm at a loss for words, my friend, but truly, thank you for that informative. Thank you for that eye-opening. Thank you for that enlightening presentation. I found myself, Teresa, abandoning my moderator role and consumed truly with what you had to say. I'm being honest here. You know, on the senior zone, Teresa, we talk about rooting out, you know, ageist thinking, right? Rooting out ageist comments, rooting out, you know, ageist actions. I think if we can start at the thinking process, everything else will fall into a better alignment there. So, you know, just thank you for that presentation. I mean, I'm actually floored. I'm sure others, you know, out there are experiencing the same. I'm going to stick with the same format as I did with Ms. Barkley. And in lieu of asking or presenting some comments, you know, outside of what I just shared, Teresa, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yes, it is.
All right. So in your work, you know, and the phenomenal work that you are doing over at EEOC, what have you found to be some of the more, and in layman terms as well, okay? Because I'm not a legal professional, okay?
I apologize.
Okay, I'm just faking it until I make it as a moderator here, okay? But what have you found to be some of the more common challenges or reasons that you hear some employers that are either reluctant to hire or are more willing to terminate older workers?
Well, first off, I think because we are becoming more reliant on technology. We're engaging even in this presentation here. We're relying on the use of certain software, certain equipment, and et cetera. And there's just some beliefs. I think in one of the videos, it's a myth, right? That some older workers aren't as proficient. The technology keeps changing. So even if you had some familiarity with it a few years ago, everyone needs refresher training. So that sort of notion is why some are, I think, a little reluctant to hire workers. But of course, that can never serve as a reason. Obviously, the decisions with respect to hiring and retaining employees must be based on their qualifications. It must be based on objective, legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons. And one area that we're seeing that employers are relying on technology, which may give them some trouble, is relying on artificial intelligence. The EEOC has recently put out some guidance with respect to that, and we have a work group and a task force looking into these issues. And it's just one of those areas where we're seeing where employers are relying on algorithms to screen out employees, right? Because of just efficiencies or just because how we are now communicating, everyone applies for jobs most of the time online, that they are using algorithms or artificial intelligence to screen people out. And it may work to have an impact negatively on older workers. It may have a negative impact on persons with disabilities. And employers should be very careful to tie selection criteria to how they're screening employees out, and not just relying so heavily on pre-screened candidates, particularly because a lot of employers are not sure what the algorithm, how it works, or how they just are relying on the pool, the output. This is the output of people they have to consider. They have no idea that they just screened out a whole lot of other people who may have been screened out not based on their qualifications, not based on their experience or skills, that they're being screened out because of the AI that was used in the process. So I would say that is a burgeoning area. We're looking into that, but technology is it's our friend and it could be our foe if we're not careful with it. So I think that's some of the issues that we're seeing cropping up right now.
Yeah, and I had never given any thought, never had any reason to give any thought to just that, AI, artificial intelligence, weeding out prospective opportunities for employers, right? That can certainly impact their their bottom line. Well, I want to thank you again, Teresa, for coming on, and with your presentation. It was just eye-opening. I want you to stand by. Can you stand by for us?
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
I have some additional questions for you on the back end. Our next guest is a tough act to follow, but thank you again, Teresa, for coming on. All right. That was Teresa Murray, Assistant Legal Counsel of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Office of Legal Counsel. Our next panelist is Dr. Michael Woodward, also known as Dr. Woody. Dr. Woody, are you there, sir?
I am here.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm just trying to take in the legal lesson right now. It's a lot.
That's exactly what I was doing. I felt like it was a
law class, but I love it. Those are fascinating cases.
Yeah, I found myself like in Law 101, and I haven't went to law school, but that's what it felt like for me. Allow me to introduce you, Dr. Woody, if you don't mind.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Dr. Michael, also known as Dr. Woody Woodward, is an organizational psychologist and clinical assistant professor of executive coaching and organizational consultant at New York University, where he leads the Master of Science degree in executive coaching and organizational consulting. He is the author of the Amazon top-selling career book, The You Plan, and has appeared on the Today Show, Live with Kelly, and CNN, among many others. Prior to this time in academia and in private practice, Dr. Woody served as the HR consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM Business Consulting Services here in the DC metro area. Dr. Woody currently resides in Chevy Chase, Maryland, with his wife, son, and dog. Before you begin, Dr. Woody, what kind of dog do you have?
So she is a rescue that we got from Puerto Rico. She came with my wife, so it was not my dog originally. She's 11 years old. She's usually sitting in here, but she left for when I started talking. She's probably a mix of an Italian Greyhound and some sort of terrier, most likely.
Okay. Well, I'll sit back and enjoy your presentation.
All right. Well, no, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you guys. Make sure everyone can see what I have up here. So thanks again for the opportunity, Jim. It's just great to be here, and I thank you for asking me to come and share with everybody. And again, it was, Teresa, it was really cool just to hear your presentation and super informative. And I also want to acknowledge the great work, Lena, that you're doing at CVS. And it was informative to hear the diversity of work options that CVS now has, because I think you're what the third largest company, something like that, right up there, third in the world now. I mean, you guys are massive, and it's really neat to hear all the different types of work out there for older workers. And I think, that's where really the rubber hits the road, is the work that folks like you are doing. So hopefully I can share a little bit about from my perspective. And as Sean mentioned, I am a professor at NYU, but the worst kept secret at NYU is I live in Maryland. So I am a county resident, and I do commute back and forth. So I'm instead of Amtrak Joe, I guess I'm Amtrak Woody, and do my best on my back and forth. So what I want to do is just share a little bit from my perspective, kind of where we are from some of the data out there, and maybe where we're going. And then hopefully I know we'll go into questions, Sean, I think with all three of us. This is Bryant Park, by the way, where my technically my office is, although I'm mostly remote. Look, COVID-19 changed a lot. And I want to kind of go through a bunch of things, because we first had the Great Reflection. And I think, Jim, you acknowledged that right at the outset, is we all stepped back and had to reflect. Then came the Great Reduction, for better or worse, and some of it probably not done correctly, as Teresa pointed out. We had a lot of reductions in force. We had a lot of furloughs. Most of it kind of forced for economic reasons, right? Because of lockdowns. Then we had the Great Retirement. A lot of people took early retirement. We'll get into that in a minute. And then came the sort of, if we're working backwards, what people started to refer to as the Great Resignation. More often than not, it was really the Great Reshuffle, because people were not always resigning outright. They were going somewhere else. Then I think we had this thing called the Great Regret, where people started wondering, maybe that wasn't the right idea. And now we're in this phase of quiet quitting, which I'll explain a little bit about. And what I think it's kind of led to is the quiet return, which is kind of the topic today, is that over 50, over 55 workforce are coming back. And so, Jim, I know you had mentioned this, right? Is this a great and quiet kind of reset going on after all this? Not so sure. So just to take us back a little bit, if anyone remembers when this New Yorker cover came out, I keep telling my wife I want to actually get this printed and framed because I think it's just a phenomenal snapshot of what so many, at least in the knowledge workforce, were going through, right? Home and isolation, figuring it out, right? It was difficult. It was tough. It was a worldwide experiment that happened all at once. And let's think back to 2019. The idea of remote and hybrid work was for a very small percentage of the workforce and mostly not accepted by the executive ranks of most companies throughout this country, except more the entrepreneurial ventures. It was just a no, thank you, not likely, except for a very small percentage of the workforce, right? A massive experiment changed our minds, right? It forced us to rethink how work can actually happen. But what also happened during that time of isolation, it wasn't just folks working at home like the young woman depicted here, but it was also people who were at home with no work, right? At home, unable to get out, with no outlet. And I think that was unfortunate and a reality that we have to also acknowledge, because so many of these conversations are around the white collar or the knowledge workforce, when in fact we had so many folks who really just were out of work and had no alternatives, particularly in retail, to some extent manufacturing. It really kind of depended, hospitality. So it was difficult, right? So we've started to mostly bounce back from all that. We've got new headwinds coming at us right now. One, inflation, of course, uncertainty around war. But so this is where we kind of started out with COVID, right? The unequal impact is something we also have to keep in mind, right? Women left the workforce at a much higher rate than men. So when we go to the actual just Great Resignation, it was by far more women than men, and it was more Black women than white women, to be honest, right? Who struggled to think about even coming back, right? So on top of that, long-term unemployment for those over 55 was 60% during 2021 compared to 40% for the rest of the workforce overall. So think about that. So disproportionately impacted women, disproportionately impacted women of color, disproportionately impacted those over 55, right? Particularly in long-term unemployment. So it's not like, so we could say everyone felt COVID, yeah, but in different ways, right? And different populations had a much, much tougher go. So we have to keep this in mind, right? When we look at how do we start thinking about solutions and getting people back. So the Great Retirement, keep in mind, during the first 18 months, nearly 2 million people just retired, set them out, right? I'm taking early retirement and done. I'm moving on. I know people personally, right, who said, this is too much, time for me to move on. The remote thing's not working. This isn't how I envision my life. So I'm just going to go ahead and get out, right? Like 2 million people. That's a big brain drain, right? That's a big knowledge drain right there. Huge knowledge drain, huge opportunity for mentorship and transition of work to those who would be taking it on. Now, when it came to the sort of reshuffle, as I like to call it, because there were those who did resign, right, outright. And as we said, mostly women, and didn't come back. But there were those who reshuffled, right? So 1 in 3 Americans did just switch jobs in 2021. But 52% of those were millennials and Gen Z. It was young folks who were moving around, right? Comfortable with doing it early in career, why not? Probably less obligations financially and to family, so it was easier, right? But 18% of boomers, so a significant amount also switched jobs, right, during this time. So we had some retirements, we had some reshuffling, and then we had some regret, right? So remember we talked about this, people are gonna leave and they're gonna go. Is the grass always greener? You know, what you don't know what you don't know, right? And so what happened was 26% of those who quit their jobs regretted leaving, right? For a variety of reasons. Some of it was certainly financial. They felt the pain, right? But 42% of those who reshuffled, who went somewhere else, say that their new job did not live up to their expectations, right? They had fantasies, right? As we all do, about that greener side of the fence, right? So there was some regret going on. No question about it, right? So what about this whole quiet quitting phenomenon? So first, I always think it's important to give perspective. I really think it's a poor phrasing of this phenomena. I don't like it. I don't like the word quiet quit. And I'll tell you why. I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think it's like a lot of these things. You get a couple writers out there, journalists who coin a phrase or jump on, try to create a trend and talk like it's new. First of all, it's not something new. And I shared this with my students last week. If anyone's familiar with equity theory, so equity theory states that motivations maximize when an employee's ratio of outcomes to inputs matches that or mismatches that of a comparison other. That comparison other could be other people, right? Or it could be an ideal, right? An expectation of the organization or what their job description or their job profile says, right? So if your inputs are yielding lower outcomes in how you're being compensated, paid, given time off, other perks, allowed to work flexibly, allowed to work remotely or in hybrid, right? If you're not getting all those perks compared to what you feel you should or what others are getting, right? You're going to feel a lack of equity, right? And so what do, right? We all seek to reconcile in some way, right? Fairness. Sometimes it's the extreme would be theft. I'll leave that to Teresa to talk about, but on that side, but sometimes it's simple things, right? It's I'm going to work less. I'm going to reduce my hours. I'm going to use time at work to do other things or time when I'm on the clock to do other things or reducing effort, right? These are natural human things that happen, right? So this is a lot of what, at least what I've read, what I hear about quiet quitting seems sort of like equity seeking. By the way, this model I'm showing you was published in 1965. Just as an FYI, right? 1965. So it's not like it's a new theory. I think it's repackaged. There is some nuance to it, no doubt about it. And I think part of the equity seeking that we're seeing comes from the fact that during COVID, during anywhere from 6 months to 2 years of hybrid and remote work, what happened? Right? You no longer had that commute time. Wow. So people were saving an average 30 minutes on each end, maybe an hour, 2 hours a day. What would you do with that time? Does anyone know what do you think happened? You worked during that time. There is research from the Society for Human Resource Management that showed during that period of time, people worked on average anywhere from an hour to 2 hours more a day, right? We filled that space with work. We didn't get up later and say, we were working at night. We were getting emails at night. All boundaries were lost. This was next to you all the time, right? So naturally, after jamming through, being all hands on deck, fighting through the pandemic, we come out on the other side, and what happened? Expectations are still really high, and folks are looking around and saying, you got to be kidding me, right? I can't do this anymore. I burned myself out. So now we see, I think the back end of this is equity seeking. So anyway, just my opinion on what we are labeling as quiet quitting. I think we have to think about is really equity seeking on the back end of an extreme and extraordinary amount of effort that was put forth during a time where we all needed to find a way to survive and make it through, right? So just wanted to keep that in mind. I think it's a really important point for us to think moving forward. So then here's the challenge, right? For employers out there, 12 million job openings, roughly. I know this fluctuates from 11 to 12, and roughly 5 million available workers. That's a problem, right? When you say that there are 2 openings for every 1 worker out there, that's a real challenge, right? So what we're going through is somewhat of a reset. So we've gone through all these greats, right? Reflections, reductions, reshuffles, resignations, all of it. Right now, and as I stated in that Today Show piece that we opened with today, is look, going back to 2019 is not an option, right? That is yesterday's news. 2019 is gone. So we need to let go of the fantasy that I think far too many in the executive suites of corporate America have fantasized about this idea of a return to 2019. That is a competitive disadvantage, taking that mentality. And I believe the evidence shows it. So right now, organizations are who are cutting edge, who are competitive, like what Lena talked about at CVS, are rethinking employee experience, right? Are creating more flexible options, and are also casting a wider net. And here's where I want to talk about the casting the wider net, because that's what's relevant to our conversation today. So this was a HireVue survey that came out just last month. 47% of companies are now evaluating more candidates from marginalized and overlooked work groups because they know they need to cast a wider net. Are they doing it out of altruism? No. They're doing it because you have 5 million available workers for 12 million positions, right? They're doing it out of reality. Let's just be honest here, right? But they're specifically looking at what they're calling mature age, over 55. But they're also looking at the other end to keep this in mind. They're looking at undergraduate student workers and even junior workers, those under age of 19. And Teresa will tell me, but I believe over 16, right, with a work permit. So we don't want to get into the illegal workforce. This is the US. But they're casting a wider net, but they're looking at both ends, just to be clear and keep it in mind, right? And some project that by 2025, those 55 and older will be 25% of the workforce, right? And I think Lena mentioned that's 24%, right, where you are now. So keep this in mind, right, as employers. So this was American Staffing Association also last month. And when more than 3 in 10 retirees, right, say that they would be motivated to rejoin the workforce if inflation continued to eat at their savings. So it's a financial reality that they're looking at right now. And this is very much a financial reality as we continue to see the challenge of inflation. And then 4 in 10 would look for, right, a job if they had a flexible schedule, right? So, if there's a flexible work schedule, or if I could work remotely in some way, full time, right? So this is what retired workers at all ages of retirement, right? Those who are retired early in particular are looking at. So the why return, right? Just to dig into this a little more, it is a financial reality. 27% of those retired workers are reentering because of financial reasons, and 21% cite inflation concerns, right? So there is a pressure right now. There is a pressure on older workers to come back, no question about it. But there's also the personal reality, right? 60% say they're looking for something to do, right? So we all learned this during COVID. Part of what drove us to work more is we're at home all day, right? And it's like, I need something to do besides just wander around my house all day and fix things and chase my kids, right? And take a dog for the walk, right? And have tea with my spouse or cocktails. And 53% that said they would be happy to go back to work. And I know this because I have hired retired folks as adjunct professors, right, who've been phenomenal, right, and have actually taught me quite a bit. So the psychology of work, this kind of comes into my wheelhouse and where I come from at this is, look, work provides structure, work provides a schedule and a routine, 2 of which became real challenges when work became fully remote without a plan to go remote, right? In fairness, nobody planned for this contingency. No one ever saw this coming, right? So you lost structure, you lost schedule and routine in some ways, not completely, but in some ways, right? Just being fully remote and not knowing how to actually adjust to that. But then when you retire and move away from work fully, all of a sudden your structure's gone, right? At least the structure that was there for you. It's on you now. Your schedule, your routine is now gone, right? To some extent, or at least the markers and shifts in the day that help create routine. Also that intellectual engagement. And most importantly, and we learned this during COVID, opportunities to socialize. Regardless of how introverted or extroverted you are on that scale of introversion, extroversion personality, we are all social creatures and we all need some level of human interaction, right, to create and generate and exchange energy. It's critical to our survival and who we are. We are really social creatures, right? We cannot live in isolation, in vacuums. Our society doesn't work that way, right? But at a higher level, work provides identity, for better or worse. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing can certainly be debated. And whether we over-rely on work for identity, I think is definitely something we should explore and consider. But here's the reality. We do look at our work as our identity. What's the first question you typically get asked after your name? What do you do? Right? That's how we judge and evaluate people, right? Also, it's purpose. Now, oftentimes, we may not work for a purpose-driven organization, but sometimes we find purpose in the work we do within that organization, or our work with that organization, or the pay and benefits helps provide us the means to pursue another purpose of some kind, right? So it depends. I don't want to over index on the idea that all organizations provide purpose, because many do not. Let's just be very frank here, right? Or many don't have a purpose that I think is aligned with the social good, right? That's a reality. But there is some level of purpose. And then, of course, meaning, right? We all wake up every day wanting to have some kind of impact, wanting to believe that our existence here matters in some way, right? And so organizations and work can help provide that for us, or again, can help give us the means to move towards that meaning, or to support that meaning that we have, right? So also consider this, when you're looking at whether it's those who've left the workforce coming back, or people who are moving, who are later stage career, moving into something different, change is stressful, right? We all know this. 30% of retirees say, this was a jobless survey, they're nervous and stressed and frustrated about returning to work. It's a little frightening. It's going to something new. And by the way, this goes throughout all ages. My 5-year-old got nervous about starting kindergarten, right? And scared. It's normal. It's how we are, right? So, but we have to recognize that just because you're older doesn't mean you're going to be less nervous or anxious about trying and something new. It's something that starts at a very young age, and we carry this throughout our lives, right? So here's the big question, right? I think the big question, hopefully we can explore, Sean, maybe more in our Q&A, but how do you meet your prospective employees where they are? Now, at the outset, I mentioned, again, in referencing the Today Show piece, right, is about listening. And all too often we don't listen, right? So as an organizational psychologist and an executive coach and an educator of coaches, I lead a Master of Science program in executive coaching. You know, one of the things we spend a lot of time on is learning how to listen, and listen with all your senses, and listen with purpose and intent. So how do you listen? How do we think of our employees as the new customer? You know, because as Lena mentioned, if you're not taking care of those folks and they're not having a good experience, that trickles down to the actual customer, right? The actual customer, particularly in retail on those front lines, or in hospitality, right? Where experience really matters. Their experience matters too. How do you design work as an experience and create community? Because we know socialization is a huge part of work. We spend most of our waking hours working. That's why retirement becomes very difficult, because it's a massive void, right, in our time. How do you create community? How do you take work to people as opposed to bringing people to work? That's the 2019 model, is I'm going to go hire and bring everyone here and put them in this giant box, right? And it's going to be divided up with little dividers called cubicles, right? How do we go to people? I've seen a lot of organizations decentralize and kind of go to these sort of regional hub gathering places as opposed to centralized office locations, right? That's one way. Some are getting rid of physical spaces altogether and using WeWork type arrangements, right? We're bringing people together for meetings, for events, and then you scatter back to do the work, right? It depends on the industry, right? And Lena can speak to that because they kind of cover all, I would say at CVS, just about every kind of work scenario there really is, which is important, from distribution centers to retail to office, all of it, right? But also, how do you leverage technology as an aid to enhancing the work experience? And Lena's video, we saw, and I believe it was AARP studies, right? Older individuals are not technologically averse, right? And use technology just as much. We may use it a little bit differently at different stages in life, and we may be using different types of tech, but it's about training to use technology as an aid. Let's help our folks learn how to use technology to their advantage, right? How do we spend time doing that? So also more specifically, and I think this is interesting. I saw this from a HR analyst, Josh Burson, who said this before the pandemic. Consider age as part of your inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, and access initiatives. Oftentimes it's not considered as part of it, right? And I think it's something that you, as an HR executive, you want to consider adding into those initiatives, right? Explore accommodations. I'm not talking about the legal definition of reasonable accommodations in ADA that I know Teresa mentioned. This is more just about how do you accommodate people for what will make them comfortable and better able to do their work, both physically and remotely, right? The types of technology that make sense, right? I think be creative in rethinking roles. All too often, I've worked with organizations where they're so stuck on a set of defined roles and defined parameters and meanings of jobs. And I know sometimes there's legal reasons, but be creative, be entrepreneurial, step back and think about the spirit of what you want to get done, not just abiding by a traditional structure that's been in place for a long time that no one's really questioned, right? So can you have older workers who might be very effective at mentoring or in advisory roles or in a training role or in a subject matter expertise role, right? Think about where you can move and massage roles. Don't get stuck on org charts because you're not going to be very agile and adaptable if you're spending your day trying to manage to an org chart. And then I think offer robust training. I know training is often like a generic blanket solution. I think it has to be very, very specific. But in addition to training, because training is often a vacation day, people go sit in a room, this is fun, I'm learning something. And then there's no off-ramp. There's no opportunity to go back and do something with it because it's either not supported or not bought into by the team, the group, the management that they're going back to. This is why, and I'm going to give a shameless plug here, coaching matters, right? The coaching profession has exploded during COVID-19. There's been a massive rise in digital coaching services and digital coaching platforms. If you haven't heard of companies like BetterUp or Coach Hub or Bravely or Optify or Coaching.com or AceUp, to name several, Torch, Sounding Board, there are a lot out there, right? But what they're doing is they're offering services at scale to help individuals who are struggling with transitions in a one-to-one intervention, as opposed to putting them in front of a room and giving them a generic kind of slate of problems they're dealing with and very generic answers. It's more one-to-one. Whether it's training your leaders to be coaches, training your frontline supervisors how to have coaching conversations as opposed to performance conversations, which are usually not helpful. How do you teach them to coach and develop people and get them on a forward, future, positive path, as opposed to harping on the mistakes of yesterday, right? So I think there are a lot of opportunities to really think about how do you take a coaching model and a coaching approach, whether it's using digital coaching services or developing your own people internally, how to take a coaching approach. Again, I'm a coach educator. I'm someone who's an advocate for really enhancing the field of coaching, the professionalization of coaching, but I think there are ways that we can use this service to really better help individuals develop, particularly at later stages, how to make those transitions into new types of roles. Because oftentimes they're going to feel uncomfortable with asking because they don't feel comfortable being vulnerable. They don't want to look foolish. They don't want to look like they don't know, right? They don't want to get those stray remarks slung at them, right? As Teresa put up there. And so they'll refrain. But if they have someone they could confide in and talk to, whether it's a mentor or a coach or a buddy that's assigned to them, where it's a comfortable, safe space to ask the kind of questions that they're afraid to ask their boss or in a group scenario, I think it's helpful. Anyway, so I'm sure there's lots of questions and thoughts out there, but that was just my 2 cents from my happy little professor perch over here in my corner of the county. So Sean, I'll leave it at that.
Well, nothing but a round of applause for yourself as well as the other panelists for sure. Dr. Woody, and what I do with the senior zone and as I navigate throughout the 50 plus community here in the DMV area, you mentioned 60% are looking for something to do in your presentation. Well, I think I know where the other 40% are located here in the DC area. So if you need the other 40%, I can help you, increase that number there, because certainly they are looking for things to do, especially with, the tremendous upsides that older adults present. And Lena touched on that in her presentation. There are more upsides to hiring older adults than there are downsides, in my opinion. And I'm biased because I am technically an older adult. Teresa is not. Dr. Woody, you may or may not be there. I'm not sure if you're on the fence right now.
I have a few months when I'm there.
But one question for you, Dr. Woody, as you do what you do, and in your work, as you talk with executives and corporate leaders, what are their fears, if they do in fact exist in looking into or hiring or having a more intergenerational workforce?
I think it's they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what's going to happen, how people are going to relate to each other. But one of the challenges that I hear often is I think that we sometimes conflate generation with stage of life, and they're different, not always distinct, but somewhat distinct. And so we have to understand that there are different needs for individuals at different stages of life, but those don't always track with age. I mean, they roughly track with age, but not always. Mm-hmm. And generational differences are nothing new. They've always been around. And we have heard throughout history, the previous generation always complains about the newest generation. This is absolutely nothing new, but we always talk about it like it's new. It just is not. And so oftentimes it's stage of life differences. And so how do we get people to step back and think less about age and more about what we do have in common, right? So let me just give you an example as a microcosm, my program. So I run a Master of Science degree in executive coaching at NYU. My student cohort this year, the average age is 43. All right. So this is an expensive Master of Science degree at a private university. Average age is 43. Most of them are making a career pivot to a second or third career. The age range of my students in this cohort of 21 students is 26 to 76. Think about that, 26 to 76. I have a young HR professional early in her career. I have a retired CEO who wants to come back and mentor and coach young executives in the space that he worked in. So my dean sat down and asked me, Woody, this was 2 years ago, because this has been similar. I'm on my third cohort right now of students. He said, how can you run and manage a class with such a range of age and experience? And I said, it's actually quite simple, because if you boil it down, they all have the same passion, interest, dedication, and commitment to human development. And do they come at it from different places and different levels of experience? Yes, right? Does it take effective facilitation skills on my part? Yes, right, to manage the conversation. But they all respect each other because they all are interested in learning from each other. I have a 76-year-old CEO who last night was on the class, was excited about what he learned from probably 28 to 31-year-old supply chain manager, right, at a major bank. And she had a great rule of thumb in management that he said, I never thought of that, right? So, but you have to have a level of humility on the part of an older worker and a younger worker to be able to sit down and build a community of workers. Look, if I can do it in a group of students where the age range is 26 to 76, you can do it in the workplace too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, in the spirit of being fair and equitable, because I don't want Teresa filing a lawsuit against Sean Perry here, I'm going to spread some of the Q&A around with the time that we do have. The program is nearly, it's approaching an end. So I'm going to direct this next question. And thank you, Dr. Woody, for your presentation. Awesome presentation. I truly appreciate it and got a lot from it myself. This next question I'm going to direct towards you, Lena Barkley. And it is, what strategies, Lena, in addition to what you've already shared, and you shared a mouthful can you suggest to employers, if there are any employers that are listening right now who are still concerned about bringing older adults, right, to the workplace where younger workers are in the majority?
The thing that is so crucial with our entire talk is listen, listen, listen. You have to listen to each other. And everyone comes with biases. When you think of a 20-year-old coming into our stores, they think of their parents when they're looking at someone in their 50s and 60s that they have to intermingle with. So they come with this bias. Oh, I don't want to deal with them. They're going to tell me what to do. But you're right. If we could just interface with each other and have that capacity to learn from each other and listen, we got to take away these fears. And that's the whole thing. We come with so much baggage already. Let's release those baggages, lift them off, and think about the individual and the skill set that each one of them bring and how we can integrate those and make it a tremendous workforce. Okay, that's what it needs to happen. I love what Woody is just talking my language. He is just, because that's what we're trying to do. We had to interface at CVS and think about what makes that person successful. What can we do differently? And we have mentorship programs. We have incorporated, training. We have technology that's built in. I have someone I can talk to when my stress level is that. And it could be that younger person who, really connects with what's happening with that senior who's having trouble with technology. You've got to just really think, well, here's where it's at. How can I reach them in the way that they can understand? And it could be a senior reaching a young person in the way they can understand. So we've had to pivot, take technology. We'd have to look at Facebook and the media, social media, to blend together what needs to make that workforce successful. So I think it's just listening, having that ability to listen and then act. Don't sit on it and have a meeting and don't do anything about it, but then act on it. And so we've put so many emphasis on training, the landscape of training, how it's brought to individuals, not only in our senior population, but our disabilities, our military, our youth. All of those intertwine. And I'm proud to be almost 71 and still in this workforce and doing that job. And so that's what we need to do. Just listen to each other, can encourage each other, inspire each other. That's what we're doing. And that's what we're trying to do at CVS.
Sounds like you're preaching, young lady. 71. But it's truly, it is simple advice, simple words, right? It's nothing complicated. To the likes of Sean Perry, right? When you just listen. And Lena, I make it my intention, or have made it my intention, with intention, right, to expand my circle of influences, right? And so I'm intentionally seeking out younger relationships. Now,
yes, absolutely.
I'm 59, so I'm trying to go with the in the 40s and the 30s and maybe even younger than that, so I can have a more expanded view of the world, right? And experience,
absolutely,
and learn from them,
and keep up.
Yes,
and that's what you want. Yes. My personal, I work with Pathways to Healthcare with youth programs in our schools. And so that keeps me in the mindset of how are they thinking, what are their reactions, and what can we learn from each other. So it is that bridge and our workforce is so different. We have the sweet spot, that's what I'm saying, of the enterprise. and it's so possible to do that. So we hope we encourage, just fill all the myths. And take a chance. That's what you need to do. Listen and take a chance.
Yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I'm a retired Air Force guy. So in the Air Force, it's kind of built in to be intergenerational, right? Because you have the young troops always coming in at 17, 18, 19. right?
Yes.
And us older heads, us older folks who are, the upper enlisted folks and the officers. So it's kind of already built in to have a intergenerational workforce in the military. So maybe there'd be some dissection, some review of what you smart folks do there. But I want to avoid a lawsuit, Lena, by Teresa. So please allow me to shoot one question over to Teresa. Teresa, I hope you're ready. The question that I have for you, Teresa, is what mistakes in recruiting new workers do companies make that jeopardize, their intention to be in compliant with employment laws?
Well, that's an excellent question. First is, as I mentioned, with the artificial intelligence, that there's a use of various technology or relying on third-party vendors to provide them supposedly vetted candidates without having ensured that those third parties or that the technology is not screening out or ruling out individuals based on prohibited bases, and that the algorithms that are being relied on don't do so unintentionally, and that they really don't understand how the algorithms work. So that's one way. But the other, I actually would like to, it actually goes in line with something Dr. Woody said. We can posit and understand why the COVID-19 had an impact on women leaving the workforce. Right? During COVID-19, there were individuals who obviously were infected with the virus. They had to stay home. They had to be cared for. There were also the immunocompromised individuals who had to stay home, that there were young children who couldn't go to school or had a hybrid work environment, and they were just vulnerable individuals. All those groups, who tends to take care of those people? They tend to be women. And so at the EEOC, we have just issued guidance on caregiver discrimination because it has worked to impact women negatively. Particularly, we've seen an intersectionality, particularly with Black women, as Dr. Woody mentioned. They may be single mothers just because of cultural reasons. That's the go-to person when someone is sick or if there's childcare, that's automatically a woman. And that can work to have a negative effect based on gender. And so how that can play out in hiring and recruiting is that some employers, when they have female candidates, they think, oh, that person's not going to be available. They have young children. I don't know if something happens during this, can I really rely on that person being able to show up? Or they may think, oh, if I let this mother who would like to work from home, is she really working? Is she taking care of her children? Is she doing laundry? Is she doing all that? So there's a lot of stereotypes around caregiving responsibilities that are associated with women, and it can work to violate the law. So there's new COVID-19 pandemic and caregiver discrimination under federal employment discrimination laws that's on our website, which is an excellent resource. And it reminds employers to not make some subjective or prejudicial presumptions about candidates simply because they are women and think they may have caregiving responsibilities, and deny them opportunities for projects, for promotions, and for employment opportunities. So that's something that we're seeing, and we think it can be something that if we're not aware of, it can be as a disparate impact or even an intentional act of discrimination, which may end you up with our agency or in front of a federal court, and you don't want that.
Certainly don't want that. Well, I hope that our collective future, within the workplace, within the workforce is one that's, not to be too cliche, but certainly diverse and inclusive and intergenerational. I wish I had more time, but I know Jim Stowe will be, on my backside, soon if I don't, wind this down. But I've spread the Q&A out as equitable as I possibly can. So I want to thank Dr. Woody, Lena Barkley, and Teresa Murray for being such wonderful, informative panelists. If I can bring Jim on right now. Jim Stowe, where are you, my friend?
I am right here, sir. Thank you so much for this marvelous discussion. And the clock on the wall was suggesting that we got a few minutes here. And I did want to see if there's any sort of final thought that our panelists might have as they kind of share and with our folks. And we'll start again, with Sister Barclay. Lena, any sort of final word you might share with, again, we've got both folks who are employers out there, we've got people in HR, we've got advocates, we've got enforcement folks, we've got people in the executive suite. What might you say to them?
I think, what we need to think about is putting people first. And that's so important. And I've got to go back to what we stand for, our purpose and our mission is bringing our heart to every part of your health. That's what CVS does. And so I'm looking for people. So please come to me. Okay. And with that lens, we have an ability to just make the best possible world of uniting people to better health. And with that, I just want to plug again that we have so many filters. You talked about caregiving. We have a caregiving resource group. We have it for WISE. We have it for the Black Colleague Resource Group. We talked about faith. We have it for Fit On. So instead of you having not the commute that you have, you can exercise in the morning and stay healthy and have that be on CVS's dime. So we're filtering all those things to make you a better person. So intertwining what everyone wants is to live better and put people first. And that's what it's all about. So come on. I'm looking for those older seniors. Come on and come work for CVS.
Thank you so much, Lena. Teresa, your thoughts?
This has been a wonderful panel, and I like Lena's idea. If I could borrow that Faith Mondays, I mean, pass that on as a best practice. We're often asked, what are some things that employers can do to make the workforce more welcoming as people transition back, and to have a moment of mindful meditation or opportunities for prayer or these kind of cohort groups. Those are all things that would be good practices to install and implement in your company. The other thing is to brush off some of these old employer policies. We're seeing that a lot of the policies obviously were in place prior to the pandemic, and they apply to individuals coming into work, and they weren't thinking of them in the context of a virtual environment. So for instance, if you all have a cafeteria, they may have, I'm sure at CVS, or in the little break room, there's a poster, there should be a poster up, right? That says, know your rights, or here's the law, you cannot discriminate based on race, color, all the categories, right? But if people aren't coming to the office, how will they see those rights? So how will they see those policies? So employers should think about how to share those policies virtually, and whether it's on their intranet sites, whether it's a pop-up in the morning, whether it's some training opportunities where they just have a 5-minute, speed training real quick on Fridays or something, to adapt their policies and the training to the new environment. So you can't have a defense, for instance, that you have a policy and a procedure for employees to file complaints and for us to investigate harassment issues if in the virtual environment they don't even know about those policies. They don't have a contact with HR. They don't even know that they have those rights and those opportunities. So that's another thing I would recommend for employers to do, is to think about how the policies may need to be updated so that they reflect current realities, and making sure that employees are aware of their rights and have the opportunity to voice concerns, bring forth issues that they're experiencing to the employer in a virtual environment.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Doc, what about you? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to reference something that Sean said earlier, and I think expand your circles, because as a hiring manager or as a recruiter, often, and just as a human, right? Most of our networks are somewhat homophilous, right? And there's built-in bias to our networks. They often are more like echo chambers than anything else. And so your greatest opportunities come from your weakest ties. There's science behind this, by the way, but those who you're loosely connected to, but have entrees into other circles. And I think that's a way to help break down the built-in and natural bias that you have in the circles that you typically go to, or the groups that you typically tap into as resources for candidates. So find ways to break that. Get yourself uncomfortable. Engage with groups that you typically don't, and others in places you typically don't. And I think you'll find it will expand your horizons and it will open opportunities. So that's just my simple thought. But I mean, and Sean, I think you said it very well. I completely agree with that.
Well, to all of you, thank you so much for this marvelous conversation discussion. To our viewers out there today and those who participate otherwise, we try to give you a reflection of a company, CVS Health. Thank you so much for what you have added to this discussion. We also try to give you a little bit of legal background that might be something for which you have an interest in. So thank you, EEOC and Teresa Murray for her contribution. And then what does that workplace look like today, and where are we going in the future? And so Dr. Wood has certainly provided a very, very excellent sort of perspective for us on that particular area. So thank all of you for this marvelous contribution today for this discussion. We talked about what's happening next. We are going to come back and talk about, in our third installment, this issue that Teresa mentioned, artificial intelligence. So stay tuned to hear more about when we'll be presenting that particular piece. We'll dig deep on that topic and hopefully provide some new insights for you on that particular area in the workplace. Thank Sean Perry again for his marvelous moderation again of this panel as he did. And Sean, I'm already putting you on the calendar for the third session. So keep that in mind. So we'll get back with you on the date.
I'm already in.
Thank you all for that purpose. I want to again re-thank again folks at Maryland AARP. Montgomery Works was involved in this process as well. Montgomery County Media couldn't do this without your help and support. Also the Montgomery County Print Shop, because help us with all of our information, trying to get out marketing and so forth. To Wanda McFadden, thank you again at TMAC Communications. The Employment Work Group was involved in this, Montgomery County Commission on Aging, also Technology Enterprise Business Solutions, TIBS in Montgomery County, and also Office of Public Information. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this process today. It's been a marvelous discussion. And please remember one thing, we only are as good as all of us have the opportunity to participate and to contribute. We can make this work. So folks, thank you for being a part of this discussion and have a marvelous, marvelous day.
Take care.